What we're going to have from this point forward is a conversation. The way I always like to start these kinds of things is to focus on the human factor. I want to begin where I think this conversation needs to begin, and that is with Generation Y, the millennials. These are generally people in their 20s and early 30s. They were mostly born to us baby boomers. Their world has been shaped in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. Their world is they thrive on smartphones and tablets and digital media. What I think a lot of people in this room don't always think about is that at some point, and this applies to every one of us, these young people will be our coworkers and even our customers. It's inevitable. So I would like to ask the panelists, what are your general observations about these young people? What makes them tick and what makes them unique or special? Feel free to jump in. We'll just go down the line here. Megan?
I just like to say they aren't going to be. They are already. I am a millennial, so I don't know that I can speak to what it feels like to be a baby boomer working with a millennial. But I think, people have said we're lazy and we're entitled and, there's all those stereotypes about millennials. But I think because we have a background with technology the way we were raised, we are innovative, we're adaptive, we are problem solvers. So having us millennials on your team can shake things up a little bit in a really great way.
Good way to represent. Reggie, what are your thoughts on that?
About the millennials?
Yeah. Keep in mind you're sitting next to one.
Well, it is interesting because I'm a Generation Xer, Gen X, and traveling throughout the state, when I talk to employers, there is a huge disconnect there between employers' expectations and their requisite requirements for employment and what millennials' expectations are. And one of the challenges are going to be is to figure out ways to kind of bridge those expectations. And we talk to employers about employability skills or quote unquote soft skills. And some of that adaptability, as you talked about, will have to be put in place both on the employer's end of the house, but also for the workers or the employees. So it's going to be that's a big challenge. I know that when I talk to employers, and we have HR professionals and practitioners here, they share those same type of stories with me as well. And I think we can do some of that type of thing around bridging the gap there. I know one of the things that is a positive for employers as they relates to the millennials is that you talked about the adaptability and flexibility and the knowledge and skill set you bring around technology. I think that's excellent. Some of the other skill sets in terms of being able to deal with situations, the problem-solving aspects. But that's going to be the biggest challenge as I see it, is how do we continue to bridge that gap between the employers' expectations of the millennials and what millennials expect in a workplace.
What we're finding in higher education, and I have 2 tables full of our students and faculty, but I have millennials sitting with us if you want to raise your hands. But we had just a conversation before we started this morning, and I had a chance to talk with our students and the students in the college. And really what I've noticed is they have high expectations of themselves as well as their employers and other people, and that they want to have quality interaction. Now that interaction may be different because they see that, and my children are the same way, that texting is a form of communication, email is a form of communication, and it's just as meaningful. But we need to move beyond that, and what we were talking about is what they expect in the classroom is an interactive experience, much like what Sister Joelle was talking about. But what it is that we can't just do a sit and get with them, and that we have to engage and we have to give them as employers meaningful work projects. But one of the things that is really important in working with number one, our students, but also people in the workplace who we have working with us, is they need continuous feedback and direction. It's not because they need to be spoon-fed because everybody believes they're the helicopter parents and they really can't think outside of the box, that everything was planned for them. But really what it's telling us is that there has to be some type of structure and some goals and objectives, but they want meaningful work to to delve into, but you can't wait until a year to do performance reviews. You have to give continuous feedback so that they can continue to shape what they're doing, how they're doing it, and that really is what makes them tick. And in the classroom, one of the biggest things that we keep working with our faculty is telling them what is good, substantive feedback and timely feedback and why that's so important. And it's because it's part of how they continuously improve.
Thank you. Nicole?
Great. I think of it a couple different ways. I personally have a Gen Y child, and I also have an 8-year-old. So I've got some different perspectives, but I'd like to share with you some recent results of some surveys that we've conducted and what we're hearing. So as you all know, Gen Y came of an age where technology, it was convenient. We saw this progression of technology go through this era faster than any era that we've ever seen. So when I think of the Gen Y, and I think about and I hear about their interaction in the workforce, I really challenge you as employers to really think of them as, this generation, they love the challenge. They're not going to sit still. They're okay with change. They're okay. They expect your company to be productive and efficient. They're not going to stand by and stay with you if you're not. One thing that I like to talk about is there are two major factors in those Gen Y that they're looking for in the workplace. And I don't know if these will surprise you, and you guys can tell me if I'm off on this, but number one is flexibility. They understand how to get the work done. They want to work hard, but they also want a good work-life balance. Another thing is, and this really hits home, but higher purpose. They want to make a positive impact in the world, and they want to really drive change. For me, I'm not going to tell you what generation I am. I told you about my children, but I've had 2 jobs, and when I look at the Gen Y, and the stats show that Gen Y will have 10 to 14 jobs by age 38. These people are going to move us forward. They're not going to set back. So I wanted to share with you a recent survey that we did to find out what motivated our Gen Ys in our organization. Most important to them was the values and ethics of the leadership. They wanted to be aligned with an organization that has high values, great ethics, and really fabulous leadership. Another thing was the desire to be challenged and the growth opportunity. A big thing that we've all talked about is the continual feedback of their work. They're not afraid of having the coaching. That goes back to the leadership piece. Some other things is work-life balance. One thing that's kind of fun, and I see it with my oldest, is Gen Y is spontaneous, and they're loyal to their thought process. So I think that I'll wrap up with that.
Very good. Will?
So I've got something that I love to do with groups. The brand business, we need to know our audience. So let me ask this question to you. And I'm going to give anyone who raises their hand a free book, but you got to be honest with me. Raise your hand if you like to be introduced by your generation. Nobody does. Okay, well, you're going to get a book. But very few people do. Very few people do. And yet it is a very significant it's a significant influence inside organizations that we meet with, and it is, as Reggie said, there is a gap. But the first thing we want to do is we want to recognize that most people today want to be connected. And it really doesn't matter if I'm a baby boomer, if you're an Xer, or a millennial. And the last thing we want to do is overemphasize this gap. I noticed a few of you, when you raised your hands regarding being a millennial, it was a little bit cautious because that's not who we are. And in the workplace, this is a mistake that is occurring every day. There will be 5 generations in the workplace, and already are in most organizations. 5. So the deal is, get connected. And you can. And you've got to close that gap. There's no question. Baby boomers that are managers need to understand millennials. Millennials need to understand Xers. You can go through the whole thing. And that's a really important exercise that everyone should do. But I think what we learn is that people really don't want to be categorized. And you have to be very careful of that in the subject matter. And the contract between employer and employee is one of connecting. And of course, today with social media, we all know how much that's done, whether we want to control it or not as owners or leaders. So the fact of the matter is, find the connections. And they're in every single organization. I do some work with Kohl's, which is a magnificent organization across generations. And I'll tell you, watch people interact and watch them connect. When you can break down that gap and get, again, the marketing and the HR people and the internal comms people to start communicating the connectors, watch what will happen. And that's the key. And that's a dynamic organization. It really has nothing to do with age. Absolutely nothing. That's my take.
What was the last thing you said? HM?
HR.
HR.
But HR marketing or internal communications people working together to, in fact, have a common platform of what are the connectors, what connects people. And so you have to be very careful on this generational piece, because it can certainly disturb those that are over age 40, really disturbs those over age 50, and those that have a lot of influences in companies are well over 60 sometimes. So you got to be careful.
Now you might find people like me who are in their 80s
Yeah.
and still working.
And have huge influence. Huge influence. And connect them. And it works.
When you say connect them amongst themselves,
First and foremost, the workplace community needs to be a community, and it needs to be connected, just like, there's a community inside this place today, and it's very diverse if you go downstairs and see what's going on. And so the job is to connect people, whether it's in an entertainment venue or the food venues, but the same kinds of things take place in the workplace. And there are wonderful ways to do that. And I think those ways are the way you answer this gap and the way that you teach organizations how to do it.
Sister Joelle, what do you make of these young people?
I have a hard problem, too, with categorizing everything. Because when you live as long as I have, you've, in a way, seen all those different categorizations go by. And people still have the same kinds of problems, in the sense that they don't want to connect in some instances. They like to work alone. It's getting harder and harder, since you're right, technology has connected us in more ways than we ever thought, and not always to our benefit. We haven't really mastered, in my judgment, how to use technology to manage things. It sometimes manages us, and that's not good. They aren't taking things away from us, but we acquiesce in certain things that we probably wouldn't if there wasn't that kind of technology available. And certainly in the 60s, when we started educating students the way we do, there was not the kind of technology there is today. But I think connectivity, people have come to understand. But it's always in the soft skill area that the trouble arises. We've had this classic example for days now with our government. It's not the kind of skills that people talk about: critical thinking, problem solving, working in a community. Those are dependent on knowing who you are and being adaptable. But first, you got to take yourself as your first and favorite pupil and teach yourself some of those things, even if you didn't get them in school, because your school was organized on the traditional model of listening to very brilliant people tell you what they know. But people come to college to find out what they can know and understand and make use of. But that is very dependent on the person's self-perception. And you don't always know that when you hire them. So you have to have in your HR department some pretty shrewd people who know how to get performance out of people before they actually have to perform. So you have to know a person's weak spots to really run things well, because you want to stay out of those. You can back into them sometimes quite unexpectedly, just by a word or categorizing somebody, and they resent it, and you don't know that that happened, or you begin to see some shading on their face that indicates to you that whatever was just said isn't going to fly. And they're not going to buy into your latest great plan for the growth of your particular organization. So if that spreads, if it moves throughout, That kind of communication is devastating to an organization.
Reggie, you have something you'd like to add?
Quickly interject about the gap, and I agree with what Will said, and as I mentioned, when I talk to employers, the adaptability piece, I think it's a lot of case by case, and I'll give you an example. My wife works for Northwestern Mutual, and Northwestern Mutual is a great company, and they have a great culture, and their culture is very conducive to being able to meet expectations of millennials in terms of the values and the leadership and the flexible work-life balance. But when I go and talk to a manufacturer in Green Bay that's a metal fabricator, I mean, that has production line and has orders to get out, and that type of culture is not conducive for what their expectations are as a manufacturer. So speaking to millennials here and employers, it depends on the culture, a corporate culture, and corporations and industries and sectors that have more of that, I would use the terminology white-collar culture, can maybe adapt a little bit towards moving towards the millennial end of things. But if millennials are going to work in a workplace that has certain expectations like a manufacturer or in a production operation, it's going to have to be a little bit of adapting for the millennials to meet the expectations of that end. So it's all case by case, and that's what I mean. It takes a give and take.
I want to target a specific question to Nicole. I want to take advantage of our opportunity to have manpower in the house on this panel with all of the resources you have at your disposal. Nicole, at Manpower, you have access to so much data, global data about trends in hiring and workforce development. What are some of those emerging hot trends that you're seeing from the big picture, from 30,000 feet up?
Well, I'll start with just a stat to share with you. We know that, and this isn't a Manpower stat, this is an outside marketing company, but we know that in 2020, there's 120 million high-paid skilled jobs that are available in the U.S. We only have 50 million U.S. citizens to fill those jobs. So even if they're off by a little bit, that's more than half, right? So as we talk about, how do we train and how do we look at youth and skilled trades and manufacturing, Reggie, how do you relate that to manufacture? I wanted to share a couple thoughts on that. When we are out talking with employers, there is a common theme, and I think we've all touched on it. There's that adaptability, but everyone, I don't think there's anyone here that would say they haven't had a challenge filling a job in the last year. We realize at Manpower that we have a talent shortage and there's a skills mismatch, and it's up to us to make the adjustment now and to tackle this in our communities at our state level. I was glad to see that Governor Walker just approved $8.5 million, $1 million of that to go to youth for internships, for apprenticeships. So at Manpower, when we look at this and we talk to employers, we know that they're 50%, our talent survey shortage just came out for 2013. Basically 49% of employers are saying they're struggling to fill jobs. So we know we have a gap. Some hot trends, and I'll go back to what my partner says, is HR has to be a strategic leader in the business. So it's one thing to have a business strategy, it's another to have a talent strategy. And so some of the hot trends that we're seeing is HR is really stepping up to develop what is our talent strategy. And it's not just who pays the most, how do we attract people, what's the fit, how do we look at the work we do differently, can we outsource some of this work to Generation Y that wants that more flexible, how do we train people differently, how do we look at our internal workforce. So the HR strategic strategy right now is what's really kind of the hot topic is HR professionals are really tasked with. They're really what grows the business. It used to be, and I'll wrap up with this, it used to be that you needed capital to build on your business, right? You needed access to money. Today, you need access to talent. So we like to call that talentism. So without talent, it'd be one thing to build a manufacturing floor that has 50 machine operators, skilled trade positions, but if you don't have the talent, it doesn't help you to run that floor.
Reggie, I wonder if you could take it from there and enlighten us about what's happening here in Wisconsin. You travel all over the state and talk to employers all over the state. What industries are growing and hiring, and how are we as a state going to bridge that skills gap that we hear so much about?
Sure. Well, Wisconsin is a manufacturing state. Wisconsin per capita has some of the highest manufacturing in the country. And manufacturing is our bread and butter. Manufacturing spirals off into other industries, whether it's in the fire industries, financial, insurance, and real estate, or IT, or what have you. So manufacturing is thriving, and manufacturing jobs are growing in Wisconsin. And a subset of manufacturing job, whether it's machinery manufacturing, or agriculture manufacturing, and dairy products, or chemical, those type of industries are really, really growing. Another industry that we really don't think about, but as a state, we've had several companies from outstate that approached Wisconsin that are looking to relocate here and create jobs or add jobs, are call center positions, call center operators. There's a lot of positions there. On our website, jobcenterwisconsin.com, if you look at the number of job postings we get in for both job orders from employers, but also part of our spidering technology, there are over 10,000 call center operator jobs posted on that website. So there's a lot of those positions. IT, I constantly hear from IT professionals and companies that are having a hard time finding IT professionals. Wisconsin and the city of Milwaukee is making a significant investment in the water field and the agriculture and aquaponics area. That's a big potential growth opportunity for the state, as well as some of the other things I mentioned in the fire area. So those are the areas that are really thriving, really growing, that provide a lot of different opportunities. And I just want to mention a couple things here, and I'm a very proud UW Milwaukee graduate myself, an alumni. And Nicole, you know this as well, and this is, I say this in the context that we have great colleges and universities here. I'm an alum of UW Milwaukee, I'm an alum of Concordia as well, but if we look at the landscape into the future, 60 to 70% of the jobs that will be in the marketplace over the next 10 years or so will be what we call the middle skill jobs, which are jobs that require training beyond high school, post-secondary training beyond high school, but not necessarily a four-year college degree. And that can be in any host of industries. It could be in the STEM industries or what have you. And I think it's a great opportunity for one, because as we look at some of the things that we're doing to address some of the skills gap as a segue, apprenticeship is a big, huge opportunity, because of the majority of the jobs are going to be these jobs, post-secondary jobs beyond high school, that require incremental training and credentialing, not necessarily a four-year college degree. The apprenticeship fits right into that. That's the sweet spot. And we're really encouraging and incenting individuals to go into apprenticeship, both employers to utilize the apprenticeship program as a way to be able to train workers based on their specific core requirements and competencies, but also for young people and career pathways to go into apprenticeship, because A, they go into the apprenticeship, they earn while they learn. Over a life of apprenticeship, on average, you earn over $140,000. So it's a great opportunity to earn while you learn. And B, as you go into the apprenticeship, you don't incur the same level of debt that you may incur going to a four-year and getting a four-year college degree. And that's just the reality of where things are going. And not just, of course, we need people to go to college, earn four-year degrees, earn master's degrees and PhDs, and particularly in engineering and science and other STEM areas. But the sweet spot will be these middle skill jobs. So apprenticeship, that's why the governor's putting money into the budget and the special session on the floor period right now to create incentives, a grant tuition reimbursement effort for employers that utilize the apprenticeship program, as well as for workers and young people and other job seekers that may be dislocated, to look at apprenticeship and to get themselves into the apprenticeship program, youth apprenticeship. Again, continue to build those career pathways and skill sets around credentialing. I want to give a shout out to Stephanie Borowski and GPS, and they provide a fantastic program around the youth apprenticeship model. Again, earning while you're learning, young people going into a company working 40 hours a week, at the same time learning on the shop floor. Sister Reed talked about competencies. That's how you develop those competencies and applicable skill sets. Great model that GPS put forward. We're continuing to invest in youth apprenticeship. And then there's the whole thing, as Sister Reed talked about, moving away from occupations, but more around skill sets and competencies. We're going to be adjusting our apprenticeship model to look at more time around competencies and less time, we call it seat time in the classroom, which is very important. But having that real world applicable skill set, that's the direction we want to go at a higher level with apprenticeship, with youth apprenticeship, and that's why the governor's investments, we're going to continue to look at those things to continue to deal with the skills gap, but making sure we can inform job seekers moving forward that, again, the jobs of the future over the next 10, 15 years will be these middle skill jobs, jobs that require post-secondary training beyond high school, credentialing and certifications, but not necessarily a four-year college degree. And I hope that's not blasphemous to our universities and educators in the audience here. And that's not to say that that's not important. It's extremely important. But we got to make sure that we align ourselves based on the labor demand in the future.
And I think one of the things that Reggie is pointing out is very true, but I think it's not an either or.
It's not either or. It's not either or.
And what we look at, if we look at what we need to do to build a skilled workforce in the trades and the middle level jobs, but we also have to look into the future that one of the other areas that are hard to be able to find is managers and leaders, that those people are going to be continuing to move up into their organizations and will need to continue to gain the skills around leadership and management. And so it's that combination of really coming back to what Sister Joelle and Alverno has done so well and Stritch is really talking about, and UWM, but lifelong learning. It's how do we ladder these things, and how do we then partner so that it's not the either or, that we're working with the technical schools as a four-year university to help bridge the next set of needs of those students.
I think apprenticeships are so important in the skilled trades. Megan, I wonder though if you could kind of bring us up to date about the importance of internships, especially in some of the professional service organizations, those kinds of employers. Tell us what are some of the best practices that companies are being proactive and developing their next generation of workforce through internships?
Mm-hmm. I think, the conversation about internships, people are having that more often now. And so it's music to my ears that companies are talking about internships. Students are paying attention and thinking, oh, I need to get myself an internship. At Alverno, our students the internship is written into their curriculum, but I have more and more students coming to me as freshmen, as sophomores saying, I don't have to do an internship for credit yet, but I want to do an internship. I'd love to learn what it's like to be in a company, to see what really happens there, to start getting some of that experience. So that's the first thing, is that more people are having that conversation. The second piece is there's strategy around it. So, companies are not just starting an internship program because people are talking about it and it seems like a good idea. It's thinking about, okay, how are we developing these interns into the employees that we can then hire? How are we providing them with professional development beyond just their role within the company? So just yesterday, I actually was visiting a company about setting up some internships, and they said the current interns that they actually have two people that are kind of overseeing their internship within the company. They have a manager, but they also have a mentor that they're assigned to. And so if they're nervous about talking to their manager about something, they don't want to ask that question because they don't want to seem dumb, they can go to someone else who works in their same department and work alongside that person. So receiving that training that they need to be able to be successful in their role. Another organization that we work with, it's a fairly small nonprofit, so they only hire one, maybe two interns a semester, but they realize that these interns are kind of missing out on the piece of where they can network with other interns. So places like, I see Wade is here, places like Direct Supply offer this really great opportunity for their interns to network with each other, talk with each other, socialize with each other. So this nonprofit has actually partnered with another small business to offer those opportunities where those interns at both of those places can come together for, going to a Brewer game together where they can talk about, hey, what are you doing at your internship? What are you learning? So it's more than just, okay, you're going to sit in this seat at this computer and do this project for me. It's professional development. It's training for the interns.
So there is a good way and a not so good way to implement an internship from an employer's perspective, and I'm sure we'll get more into the details of that in our second panel discussion. But I want to step back to the bigger picture, Sister Joelle, and I've certainly learned a lot from you in so many ways over the years, and how important is mentorship, the concept of mentorship in developing the next generation of talent?
I think it's very important. The difference in you're talking about internships and apprenticeships, there you're talking about the individual who wants to have that experience. When you talk about mentorships, you're talking about the person who's going to do the training within those two possibilities. So I think it's also important, though, to build into programs like that, and the mentor should understand that students have to, while they're still student workers, need to understand the politics within that culture that they're having this experience. So having the opportunity, somewhat the way Megan described it, of interns getting together and talking about what they've learned, to also help them debrief on what they learned about the pecking order within that organization. Because it all goes on and everyone knows it. The talk around the bubbler may not be the thing anymore. It's Twitter. It's changed in that way for sure. But as I've listened to this conversation, thought, I think you were the one that said, don't emphasize the differences so much. Maybe I've just been around too long, but it seems to me it's always in that, and I said this before, in the soft skill area that things come apart and people can't bridge that gap for themselves. That's important to learn how to do that. I worked with a fellow once who was absolutely brilliant in never letting anything come to an impasse. He always could restate it in some way, and I knew another fellow, he was at Stanford in their PR office. He was great for immediately instituting a baseball game. As soon as anything got like this, he'd call the shots on it and relax and get people off that subject for a while. It's important to learn how to do that without offending people, because we get on each other's nerves enough. And we get pushed close together in businesses, especially if they're small businesses, and the group or the community is a small community. Everybody knows everything that's going on. So it's important to learn to figure out, to analyze that situation, and how do different people in that community respond to different kinds of stimuli, whether it's verbal or just what is their spot. What we're talking about is human beings, and they don't change all that much. They're born into families and they have certain personality traits already in their DNA. So to be a really good mentor, that word goes way back to the time of the Greeks. It was in the Odyssey. Telemachus, I guess, that's how Athena appeared to him, and guided him. And so mentorship has meant being the guide. And you then, as the guide, need to know yourself, so you're not imposing on that student who has his or her own goals, and you have to figure out how best to help them develop those things. So mentorships are critical, but especially critical for the person who's willing to take on that. If HR can control an organization, mentorships can too. Have a real impact in how they translate for this younger person or person changing careers, how they communicate what the culture of the organization is. they can be just as powerful as the HR person, maybe even more so. It's a one-on-one relationship. So I'm all for mentorships.
You mentioned the culture, internal culture of an organization. Will, I'd like to tap into your expertise from talking to you and reading your book. Good brands are built from within, and you can't. It's impossible to have a solid external brand of an organization if internally the people are not buying into that brand and what that organization is about. Can you expand on that?
Sure, the internal brand is focused to the workplace, and the external brand is focused to the marketplace. So when they work together, you have a terrific win-win, because ultimately the product that is being created for the marketplace can attract talent. And the brand ambassadors inside the business that in fact are helping to create that product will in fact do a great job, particularly today with social media, to promote that product. So first off, I approach every single day like I'm an intern, and I have someone here from my office, I don't even know our age difference, but I will learn from her today, and she will learn from me. She'll prepare me for this, and I will work with her, and I think the difference, the gap in age is significant, but it means nothing to us. Matter of fact, if Heidi's here somewhere, I know she is, can you stand up? So
She's way over there.
that's great, okay. So I think what's important here in terms of the internal, external branding is that you simplify this stuff. I'm a great student of a Ken Blanchard or Marshall Goldsmith. There's nothing that any of us are doing that's really rocket science. It's practical, easy stuff. And it is about the human experience. And when you go downstairs, as I did this morning, I talked to a security guard, I asked a guy that was standing at one of the blackjack tables who had nothing to do, does it get really crowded here? And I was curious. That's what the workplace should be. And I think some people often describe the manufacturing and the service sector as being these big gaps, but I'll tell you, in little Oconto, Wisconsin, I've done work with a company called Cruiser Yachts. Now they put out of that line some really big, expensive boats, but the key is the 18-year-old who's making $13 an hour wearing a mask doing fiberglass all day. If he's highly engaged, the buyer of that $400,000 boat wants to know that. And the key in that manufacturing organization is to have that 18-year-old in Oconto feel really passionate and engaged about the fiberglass work he's doing. Now, we may not all be making $400,000 boats, I get that, but the bottom line is manufacturing, as it was defined by Ford 2 decades ago with quality as job one, changed the dynamic. You've got to tie the customer into this. That's the external brand tied to the internal brand that gets that 18-year-old Oconto to get there early, because the buyer of that boat wants to be assured that the guy that did the fiberglass piece cared. And that's how you sell the brand, and that's how you sell the position, and that's all it is. But a lot of manufacturers, a lot of leaders, a lot of assembly line folks that manage people don't get that. That's the deal. So I think it is. I think it's this relationship, this basic. We all want to learn from one another, and I think it can be great tying the two brands together.
Can we go back to that point about challenge that you brought up? Sure. Manpower. I think we don't owe it. That can be dealt with in a way that people have a natural talent for something. But you can even make people smarter than they think they are by putting them in certain situations and developing them. People don't always know what talent they have. So we have to figure out. I don't think talent is any more rigid in people than IQs are. They're malleable. And you can make people surprise themselves. And so in talent, I think if we just look for natural talent, we'll keep looking. But we also ought to take on the task of trying to develop that talent within those people that we have in our workplace. You can always find someone who can do it better, they say. Well, that's expensive because you've already made an investment in X. And maybe X is your person, and it's not looking elsewhere. And today, this gets into the issue of morality. In, you know, being human, and we weren't born for business. We were born to make a life that had meaning for us individually. And work is critical to that today, because today everyone is a worker in some way, shape, or form. It's not like the class societies of the past where there were really just two. And so talent becomes a real issue, but we have to figure out how to develop it. And that's where the mentorship comes in.
To that point of figuring out how to develop it, I wonder if Peter and Sister Joelle, there's a lot of controversy over the concept of the Common Core school standards. Without getting too specific about that, I just wonder, I'd like your take on the concept of evaluating teachers. How should teachers be evaluated, and are we as a society putting too much emphasis on the, quote, core competency tests of students? Is that resulting in too much teaching to the tests? What say you about that?
Well, one of the things that, as he threw that question out as last night, is I dialed up or emailed, had a conversation through email with my colleague, Dr. Frida Russell, who's the Dean of our College of Education and Leadership. And one of the things that we talked about, what is good about the core competencies and that whole approach, is that really what we're starting to say is that there's a common base of knowledge that has to be continually baked into the education, because we have to understand that we're living in a global, mobile society. And what we have to realize is that the 21st century young parents and parents are mobile, and that they're not going to stay in one place. So they're going to be moving from state to state. And how do we start to ensure that there's a body of knowledge that is able to be dispersed to our young people, so that we can have the educational base to have the economic development and to be able to move forward. So I think we get caught up in the whole idea of, are we teaching to the test, and do we have these core standards, and is it too much that, or how do we measure teachers? I think we got the conversation wrong. It is, what is the knowledge base that our students need to be able to know, understand, be, and do, and then how do we continue to impart that? But we have to remember that we live in a 21st century in which people are mobile. And how do we ensure that we have an education system that allows us to enter that? And I think we have to stop in education really politicizing the whole conversation of teaching and learning. It's really about how are we going to create sustainable communities, and what are the best ideas that help us to do it. And so whether you're a fan of the Common Core standards or not, at least we're coming down to saying that there's a body of knowledge that we want people to understand, that we're giving teachers a framework and able to work from, and set of expectations, and we all are more accountable. And that is the world that we're living in today. We have to be accountable. In higher education, in K-12, in our businesses, we have a public accountability. We have to be able to deliver what we say and what we do. And this is one way to do it.
Sister Joelle, how should teachers be evaluated?
Well, I guess I'd start out by saying, would you go to a doctor whose patients constantly die? No, you wouldn't go to that doctor. You want someone who's got a track record. And what business are we in education? We're in the business not simply of transmitting information. That is not enough. I'm losing my train of thought here. So there's something going on in education right now that business likes, and it is related to the core competences. It's called the flipped classroom. Does anyone know what that means? The flipped classroom is a model that instead of taking time in the classroom to lecture or show films, you use the time, you give the films to the student as homework, and they do all of that outside the classroom. In the classroom itself, the students are working on projects which help to develop their abilities and their talents, and they get to know about that themselves much more clearly than they had when they started. So, yes, I agree with Peter that it's a mobile society, but what moves? It's the individual who's moving. And when you have built, like if you are you drive a car, you have what they call bodily kinesthetic intelligence. It doesn't go away. Once you've learned, you've got it. And that's Howard Gardner, no, not Howard Gardner. Yeah, it is. The multiple intelligences guy who talks about the different kinds of knowledge, different kinds of intelligence. And that is related directly to this talent question, too. If you understand what he's talking about, no one has simply this abstract thing called intelligence. It manifests itself in different ways, like the bodily kinesthetic dancers, even football players. They're not dumb football players. Think of it, when they're out, they have a strategy, but in the midst of the game, they have to make decisions quickly to carry out that strategy again. That's the so-called adaptability and flexibility. And we can develop that within the classroom situation if we make the classroom a certain kind of place, not a, what do they call that? A sage on the stage kind of situation. And mentors could, they don't have a stage usually, so they actually used to have stages in classrooms. Because one time at Harvard, a very controversial professor fell off the stage, and the whole class was laughing. And he picked himself up, and he says, "First time I've ever found myself on the level of my students." How was that for a put down? That kind of thing used to happen, but I digress. Enough said. I think evaluation of teachers gets down to the fact, are the children learning? That's the measure that you have to have. And you can't take it quickly. Like, we do things so uniformly. We give a test, and then we grade it. What does a grade tell you? Where are the A lines in society that you get to stand in if you were an A student? Sometimes C students are much better workers than A students because they have an exalted opinion of their knowledge that isn't very helpful when they're working with a lot of other people who have a different kind of intelligence, which may be more germane to the operation at hand. So I'm back to my one point, that we're developing human beings, and stop categorizing them, that was said many times, and look at it as bringing that person to full development as much as is possible. And that requires an environment in which that can happen. And that's the culture then of the organization. And really, a business is an extension of the educational process. When you leave, the internship idea that grew up in medicine, that's where it started, was someone who had taken all the courses but was not ready to go into general practice, had to do an internship to get more experience and then go into practice. So that model is still obtained when you think about it in an internship. You're getting that person ready to do much more than what they're doing in that internship. But that then becomes the evaluation of the mentor, which is the teacher in the traditional classroom, or the faculty member. I think I've said it all.
With that, we're going to close out the first panel discussion. I'll turn it back over to Dan. How about a hand for our panelists?